the mirror in the basement, and it called my name. First time the house called my name, I wrote it off as a prank played by the settling wood. I had signed the papers that morning and staggered through boxes that tasted of dust and cardboard, convinced the house was merely making itself known the way old houses do, sighs in the floorboards, a draft that remembers previous winters. The mirror lived in the basement like a tenant who refused to leave. Taller than me, its frame carved with curling leaves, it stuck to the far wall as if it had nowhere else to be. I stood at the top of the stairs and felt, for the first breath of many, that it was watching. That night, with a single bulb swinging above the washer and dryer, I noticed the mirror's reflection lagging by an unnerving beat. I hissed and waved, and the glass returned the motion a hair later, like a delayed reply on an old phone. I told myself it was fatigue, an eye trick blended with the hum of the refrigerator. Still, the air near the mirror felt cooler, and when I pressed my palm to the frame, it did not return warmth. Instead, there was a faint, patient silence, like a held breath waiting for permission to finish a sentence. A week in, the house began to supply names. At 3 a.m, a soft syllable threaded the cellar floorboards, my name, spoken as if by someone brushing past. I climbed down with a flashlight and called into the air, the beam jittering against concrete. The mirror remained a dark, patient surface. When I caught my reflection, it smiled a second too long, as if it had remembered something funny and hoped I would laugh too. I left the light on and slept in a chair by the doorway, because the house felt larger when I didn't try to meet whatever watched from below. Curiosity is an expensive habit. I started researching. The previous owner had been a quiet man whose obituary read like a paragraph stolen from a quieter century. The real estate listing mentioned original fixtures, an antique mirror included. Neighbors offered clipped answers. It belonged to someone who kept to themselves, and eyes that refused to settle on the mirror when I described it. An antique dealer sent me a curt email about sentimental surfaces, about objects that remember the hands that polished them. I read those words like a litany and began cataloging the small inconsistencies the house offered. The contradictions multiplied. Objects shifted by the morning, coasters moved an inch, books not quite where I left them. At times the mirror would fog from the inside out, a thin bloom like breath but colder, and none of my exhalations hung in the basement air. Once, my voice came back to me altered. I said hello, and the basement returned my word, softer and delayed, as if the house were thinking of an answer and then preferring to keep it. The pattern was not violent. It was meticulous and patient, like someone cataloging my reactions rather than trying to frighten me outright. I tested it like a scientist and a coward. I draped a sheet over the glass and taped it tight. The basement seemed pleased to be denied the refusal of its mirror. Night after night, though, the voice found its way into my sleep with the patient persistence of an insect at a window. Murmurs between dreams, a syllable tugging me awake. I began leaving a recorder running, absurdly hopeful that technology could arbitrate the uncanny. When dawn came, the playback held hours of static, and one clear, single word toward the end of a file, the way someone clears their throat before telling you something dangerous. Maya came over because I needed someone who knew the difference between paranoia and pattern. She laughed at my ritualistic barricades until she looked into the basement and stepped back without meaning to. "It's like it's almost you, but not," she said, frowning. Later, she would fumble for the phrase and tell me it felt like lag on an old video call, familiar and wrong. She refused to be down there alone and left a kettle on the stove to give the house human noise. Her instinct was protective. Mine had turned to proof. I kept the recorder running. At one point, I tried to break it. I swung at the glass with a crowbar with more theater than intent, wanting the satisfying sound of finality. The bar kissed the surface and skittered away as if repelled by a skin of oily resistance. The glass remained whole, indifferent. The frame picked up a crescent of my reflection that I couldn't reconcile with the rest of me. When I stepped closer, the voice arrived clear enough to be a punctuation. It used an old nickname that I only hear in my head on rare occasions: soft, intimate, and wrong, coming from a house. I listened to the recorder back and forward until the ticks and hums began to rearrange themselves into intent. Played at normal speed, there was white noise, sped up or slowed. Strange syllables emerged at the edge of comprehension, the sound of someone trying on my voice like a coat. It was not a literal imitation, but an echo tuned by memory. In the quiet moments between weather and washing machines, the mirror rehearsed my own cadence, then laid a different word beside it. I stopped trusting the sound of my own speech, because each repetition learned me a little too well. One night, the call changed rooms. I was in the basement, tired, defiant, when my name rose from upstairs, as if the house had turned its head. It was the same cadence, the same breath between syllables, and it threaded down the stairs into my chest. For a sliver of time, I believed the house could walk. I believed myself suddenly much smaller. I climbed, and the hallway looked wrong, pictures misaligned, a lamp too cool in its tone. The mirror's absence upstairs made the air feel newly dangerous. The voice was not bound to glass. It had arms and tended to press at windows. Facing it finally, I stood alone at the base of the mirror, with the sheet folded at my feet. The glass looked back with a patience that felt practiced. I said my name aloud in a voice that tried to be brave. For the first time, the reflection moved with me, and then did one small thing differently, tilting its head not when I did but a breath later, and smiling when I did not. The voice answered, not from behind the glass, but as if the glass were a mouth. It returned my words in my tone, but not my memory. It offered no malice, only an uncanny familiarity, as if it wanted to arrange my life into a version it preferred. I packed a bag and left in the gaslit drizzle before dawn, tape and recorder, and the heavy feeling of being known in my pockets. The mirror sat behind the small window like a quiet thing with a heavy, patient stare. Driving away, I laughed once, wild and brittle, telling myself I would not look back. At a red light behind me in the rear view, I thought I saw the basement window rectangular and wet, and perhaps a thin, bright line where the mirror caught the street lamp. For a breath, I imagined it calling, but the street hummed, and my phone buzzed with something mercilessly ordinary. A week later, a real estate notice flitted across my feed. The house was for sale again. The listing photo, cropped and polite, included a snippet of the basement window. The description mentioned original features, an antique mirror included, a detail that felt knowingly malicious and oddly gentle at once. I closed the page and placed the recorder in a drawer where its light could not tempt me. Sometimes, when rain edges the city into quiet, I hear a breath that sounds like my name. I cannot be sure if it comes from the house or from the way memory imitates risk. Either way, certain mirrors remember you better than you remember yourself.